Good evening, everyone. It is a distinct honor and privilege for me to be able to introduce today's speaker, Professor Robert Klassen, whose academic contributions and leadership have made a significant impact on both research and practice in the field of education. Rob joined the University of Oxford in November 2023, nearly a whole year ago, as Professor of Education, where he leads Renew, the research network for the education workforce. This is a hub focused on advancing understanding and innovation in the global education workforce. His journey to Oxford has been marked by an outstanding academic career that has spanned continents and disciplines. Before joining us here at Oxford, Rob was professor and chair of the Psychology in Education Research Centre at the University of York, where he worked from 2012. Prior to his tenure in the UK, he held academic positions at the University of Alberta in Canada, from assistant to full professor in the Department of Educational Psychology. Notably, before entering academia, Rob's experiences as an educational psychologist and high school teacher in his hometown of Vancouver have deeply informed his work, providing him with a unique perspective on the real-world challenges that educators face. Rob's primary research interests lie in understanding teacher motivation and development across the career span and in different cultural contexts. His current work, driven by a deep commitment to addressing global educational challenges, focuses on developing and testing theory-informed technological innovations and interventions, which are related to the recruitment, selection, and professional development of teachers and school leaders. His research and innovations aim to tackle one of the most pressing issues in education today, teacher shortages. And he does this by creating scalable solutions with real-world impact. His scholarly contributions are extensive, with over 100 peer-reviewed publications, book chapters, and books. His research has received major funding from organizations such as the ESRC, the ERC, and the World Bank. And his projects span multiple countries, including the UK, Australia, Morocco, Kenya, South Africa, and across Europe. Rob has also served as an advisor to education ministries across the globe, including in Africa, Australia, Europe, and South America. Beyond academia, Rob's entrepreneurial spirit is evident in his founding of TSP, a spin-out company launched in collaboration with the University of York in 2023. Don't worry, I will finish soon. This is aimed at bringing innovative solutions in teacher and school leader development to the wider educational sector. In recognition of his exceptional contributions to education and psychology, Rob is a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences and the American Psychological Association. He has also served on the editorial boards of leading journals, including the British Journal of Educational Psychology, the Journal of Educational Psychology, and the Oxford Review of Education, a journal that some of us are familiar with in this room. Today, Rob will be delivering his inaugural lecture on a topic that couldn't be more timely, addressing global teaching shortages through research and innovation. Given the current global crisis of teacher shortages, his insights into how research can lead to innovative solutions are essential to both policymakers and practitioners in education. Please join me in welcoming Professor Rob Klassen.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, Vicki. And it's a real honor, of course, to be here today and to see my colleagues, my friends, and family in the room. So let me start with my introduction to ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Pro Vice Chancellor, colleagues, family, and friends. I'm so deeply honored to welcome you all to the Department of Education at the University of Oxford. And it's a real privilege to stand here for my inaugural lecture. And I'm both excited and humbled to be able to share this occasion with you. So just a little bit about the University of Oxford and the Department of Education, which have a scholarly tradition dating back almost 1,000 years for the university and over 100 years for the Department of Education. And I feel very fortunate to be able to contribute to this tradition of scholarly excellence. And today I want to address a challenge that is both universal and urgent in this country by focusing on this global shortage of teachers. And I want to explore today how we can use research and innovation to address these challenges that we see in this country and around the world. So since I entered academia 20 years ago, my research interests have largely been in the area of human motivation, the drives, reasons, and explanations for behavior, and the decisions that people make about their lives. And that includes the decisions people make about their careers. And I'm particularly interested in how people make decisions about potentially entering the field of education. So teachers, of course, represent one of the world's largest workforces and arguably one of the most impactful workforces that we have. And by the end of this lecture, I hope that I'll have convinced you that in a time of unprecedented pressures on education systems, that theory-based research and innovations using motivation theories can make an important contribution to solving or at least addressing the workforce issues that we have around the world. Let's start, though, by considering the case of one of our European neighbors, quite far away in Europe, but Estonia. Why Estonia? Whoops. So Estonia is an education powerhouse. It's the new golden child of European education. It tends to rank first in Europe in PISA rankings, for example, with very high levels of performance for 15-year-olds in reading, maths, and sciences. But it might not be the first country that comes to mind. There are educational heavyweights like Finland and Singapore that have long had very good success with their teacher workforce and also with their educational performance. But Estonia has developed an excellent educational system and has done very well in very many ways. It's replaced Finland as the go-to European country for education tourism. Maybe some of you are into education tourism. But in fact, the then Shadow Secretary of Education, Bridget Philipson, visited in 2022 to get a sense of what makes Estonia different and why is it so successful in the last decade or 2 decades. And we know that much of Estonia's success is due to the quality of its teaching workforce, very highly educated to master's level, and quite well paid for the context. In fact, there's a push to raise teacher compensation in salaries to 120% of the national average for the professions. But Estonia's schools face a very serious problem. More than half of the teachers are 50 or over. That's not a problem in itself, but compared with the EU average of about 35%, and many will retire in the next 10 years. And just like less celebrated school systems around the world, it's finding a real challenge to recruit and retain the young teachers it needs to sustain its workforce. 1 in 3 of its new teachers resigns prematurely in the first 3 years, and approximately half are gone within 5 years. This puts a lot of stress on the education system. And for those who are science teachers or STEM advocates, the Education Ministry of Estonia warned that the country faced shortages in physics teachers. They hired 13 teachers over the last decade to teach physics. So there's a real pressure in that country, even though it's quite a small country. So let's look at why recruiting and retaining teachers is so important for education systems. First of all, this is a meta-analysis conducted by John Hattie from the University of Melbourne. This is quite a well-known study. 800 studies were reviewed, and you can see that teaching approach and teacher characteristics made the strongest contributions to learning. And so effective teachers help students achieve better test scores. That's one thing that might be important, but also higher graduation rates and improved long-term educational outcomes. And research consistently shows that students who have experienced high-quality teachers progress more quickly academically and make more money when they graduate from secondary school and then from university. So attracting new teachers is important to maintain a healthy system. But retaining them in the first 5 years of experience is also very important to protect educational systems and, in fact, national well-being. So how bad is the teacher shortage? Well, it's pretty bad, actually. Let's take a look. Depending on the setting, and some of the countries that we've worked in over the last decade, such as Finland and Malawi, have actually done pretty well. There are more applicants than places for training, but that's rare. Most countries are experiencing serious and increasing problems and impactful declines in teacher numbers. But it's not just about the numbers. They affect the quality of education, student outcomes, and ultimately, again, the societal well-being. Let's look at teacher shortages in the UK. So you might have seen in all of our newspapers, it seems every year about August or September, you'll see headlines in The Guardian or in The Times or in The Telegraph. The number of graduates in teacher training is a real problem. It's catastrophic level, it was described as this year. England's retention, it's also expensive. It costs the country about £1 billion per year. And that's usually due to hiring supply teachers, for example, at higher cost. That's true in Scotland as well, and in Wales, as you can see. It's not just England. Northern Ireland has certain other issues, but not so much the same kinds of shortages that we face in England or in Scotland or Wales. But in my home country, in Canada, it's the same situation. Teacher shortages are a real problem in provinces of British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario. And key factors include rising student enrollments, an aging teacher workforce, and again, difficulties attracting teachers and then retaining them once they're in the job. And I'm going to give 3 more examples because these are countries that we're currently working in. And so Australia, we work with colleagues at UNSW and at University of Sydney. I don't think they're watching this live because I think it's 3 a.m. But I know a couple will watch the recording. But we're working to try to understand the source of these shortages and trying to develop recruitment and retention tools with our colleagues to work, especially in remote regions of New South Wales. In Hong Kong, we're working with colleagues to develop and test tools for teacher recruitment and retention and development. And the attrition rate there, for other reasons than we'll find in the UK or in Australia, have doubled in 3 years. And so right now they have a situation where 12% of their teaching workforce leaves prematurely, not due to retirement, each year, and forces the Ministry of Education to fill the gaps with unqualified teachers. And finally, in Africa, the problem is especially pronounced in certain African countries, and there's a severe shortage in sub-Saharan Africa particularly. And UNESCO estimates that Africa as a continent will need 15 million teachers by 2030 in order to reach sustainable development goals. And over the last 5 years, we've worked in Kenya and Morocco and Malawi to develop recruitment interventions and selection tools as well to identify those who will have the most success as teachers in the field. So the problem of shortages in many countries around the world is ongoing and really threatens the achievement of all kinds of important national and international outcomes. Let's look at who is actually hurt by these shortages. Teacher shortages don't affect a country in the same way, in a uniform way. So a recent report from Sam Sims at UCL highlights that schools in poorer areas of the UK face the greatest challenge in recruiting teachers, with 85% of school leaders in the most deprived schools noting that shortages are affecting the quality of education in their schools. They don't just hurt students academically, they widen social inequalities. And students aren't the only one, of course, affected by shortages. Teachers are also affected. And teachers are affected by increased workload when there are staff shortages, job dissatisfaction, and overall lower morale in a school and in school systems. And shortages create a cycle where teachers feel increased stress and burnout, leading them to consider leaving as well. And some of us are familiar with this idea of turnover contagion, where teacher departures trigger more turnover due to increased workload and lowered morale, and results in the need for more, often not unqualified, but newly trained teachers who tend to have the lowest impact in terms of educational achievement on their students, because it takes 3 to 5 years to become most proficient. A question to be asked is, why are there shortages and what can we do about this problem? And of course, that's what I'm going to try to address today. The whys of the problem include graduates' perceptions of poor working conditions, including funding pressures, low status, and the long-term challenges of the profession. And these are often well known. Our own research with secondary school students and undergraduates point to a lack of awareness, a knowledge gap about details about the job, with little knowledge actually about salary and benefits of the job, and a lack of knowledge about the positive aspects of the job. This surprised us because most secondary school students and undergraduates have spent the last 12 or 13 years in schools observing the teacher in front of the class. That doesn't mean they have a very good sense of the challenges or the rewards that teachers face or they can gain. Most solutions that have been proposed are systems level solutions, naturally, policy solutions. And they're aimed at the population of existing or prospective teachers, but they don't really attend to individual differences or group differences. And system-wide interventions, such as improving leadership and developing leaders, fostering supportive cultures, reducing class size, raising salaries, may reduce teacher attrition. And these systems level interventions are often based on organizational psychology principles, which highlight how leadership styles and institutional cultures affect retention in the workplace. And many of the current interventions focus on improving working conditions naturally. For example, with mentoring for early career teachers and provision of financial incentives. Let's look at mentoring first. High quality mentoring has the potential to support the retention of teachers, especially early career teachers. The government's early career framework introduced a formal mentoring program for new teachers, and research shows that mentoring has a real impact on retention rates of new teachers. Ingersoll and Strong found that teachers who participated in mentoring programs were more likely to remain in the profession, experience higher levels of job satisfaction, and demonstrated improved teaching effectiveness. There are cohort-sensitive interventions where we look at improving working conditions and flexibility. And a recent report from TeachQuest, Tomorrow's Teachers, looks at how a roadmap to get Generation Z into the classroom. And those in Generation Z or Gen Z, depending on where you're coming from, it usually refers to those in their late teens and 20s who are either entering the workforce or making decisions about their career pathways. And a significant and relatively new post-COVID obstacle to recruitment is a current lack of hybrid work and flexible work in teaching. And the report recommends that to compete with other career opportunities, education organizations need to look at pay and conditions, but also about flexibility and hybrid working. Of course, the media focused on one thing from the report. So you might have seen in The Guardian, teachers in England offered lions to make job more appealing. This wasn't the gist of the report, but it was the easiest and quickest way to maybe talk about Gen Z and how lazy they are. But other perks include, of course, more flexibility in hybrid work and so forth. But there are other solutions that we might consider as well. And one thing that some researchers, especially in computer science, are proposing is the idea of replace teachers with robots. And we're not far off from that right now, because lots of us are looking at artificial intelligence for addressing teacher shortage and for teaching. And you can see in a company wanting to address European teacher shortage with using avatars to teach mathematics. And in our own work, we're developing some AI-supported mentoring tools and interventions that might fit into this category. But it's probably not a long-term or a short-term solution to replace teachers as a whole. But the most common or most publicized solution proposed by governments are financial, and financial incentives are usually the go-to response when we look at trying to recruit and retain teachers. In England, the Department for Education offers teacher training bursaries for specific subjects. In 2024-2025, the rate is £28,000 in chemistry, computing, mathematics, and physics, £25,000 in biology and a few other subjects. And they work to attract people into the profession. Again, Sam Sims and Ben Henda at UCL examined the impact of financial incentives on the retention of math and physics teachers in the UK. And the study evaluated a policy that proposed an 8% pay supplement to early career teachers in these subjects, finding that it reduced the likelihood of early resignation by 23%. And that sounds promising. But the study only evaluated the short-term effects of the financial incentive policy, meaning that it didn't address what happens to teachers when the incentives are no longer provided. While the policy appears effective in the short term, the impact beyond the initial years of implementation is unknown. So why do these financial incentives not work very well in some cases? And the use of financial incentives is contested, both due to a lack of evidence and also for a lack of a strong empirical and theoretical foundation. My colleague and collaborator, Professor Beng-Wat See from University of Birmingham, and her colleagues at Birmingham and Durham recently reviewed the effectiveness of financial incentives on teacher recruitment and retention. And this is important work because it's a waste of public money if doling out quite large sums of money to quite a few people doesn't work very well. Their systematic review focused on the effects of incentives used for recruitment and retention. They concluded that offering remission of student loans, higher salaries, or premium for teaching in hard-to-staff areas in schools is effective in attracting teachers. That's good news. However, it's not clear that such external motivation is desirable or that it attracts the best teachers, and it is quite clear that the attraction is not lasting. In terms of retention, the strongest studies in their meta-analysis conclude that financial incentives are effective in retaining teachers in hard-to-staff schools, but only when there is a kind of tie-in involved where teachers are committed to staying on in the school for a specified period of time. And troublingly, the impact disappears once the incentive is removed. And so this is probably why bursary schemes might attract people, might temporarily solve recruitment problems, but probably don't work to solve retention problems in the long term. Let's take a closer look at the effects of financial incentives from the perspective of relative theories. First of all, there's an undermining effect of rewards on intrinsic motivation. For those of you who are motivation researchers, you've probably seen studies that show that paying people for performance undermines their basic interest in whatever that activity is. So external rewards, such as financial incentives, can undermine intrinsic motivation. It's called the reward paradox or undermining effect. And it's been reported in a great many studies in the 70s and 80s, especially when the idea of intrinsic rewards in self-determination theory was proposed. And there's a neural basis as well for the undermining effect. My academic colleague at the University of Tübingen, Ko Murayama, who has been here several times to give talks, showed that monetary rewards lowered the activity of prefrontal brain areas that are normally associated with intrinsic valuing of tasks. And if extrinsic rewards are seen as the central reason for decision-making, they can shift teachers' focus from the inherent satisfaction of teaching to the pursuit of external rewards. And it reduces long-term commitment and passion for the profession, especially if the incentives replace the natural satisfaction that can come from teaching, but doesn't always, of course. A second reason for the lack of effective rewards is appealing to personal utility, the benefits of the job, may not result in high levels of retention. Our own study with A-levels and undergraduates and practicing teachers show that those who are interested in a teaching career are more concerned about the social utility of teaching. That's the driving force for most people enter the profession, not the personal utility values of increased salary. This study that we conducted a couple of years ago and published in 2023 with one of our Hong Kong collaborators, Hei Wei, shows that you can see the red, this is a structural equation model that you can see with the red highlighted pathways, that personal utility values, that's values of job security, pay, a need for autonomy and status, in fact, were positively associated with quitting the profession. You can see that social utility values, that's altruism, student relations, and co-worker relations, were negatively associated with quitting the profession at time one and then at time two by extension. And you can see that perceived fit, the idea of value congruence, was an important mediator between social utility values and quitting intentions. So maybe we're missing a trick in our teacher recruitment and retention strategies. We have offered few interventions that target the career decision-making motivation of individuals. Instead, we focus on external rewards. These individual interventions could be grounded in behavioral sciences and educational psychology, with an emphasis on the importance of addressing personal motivations, psychological well-being, and professional identity. But how can we actually use theory to address these thorny teacher shortages? You've probably read this quote before from Kurt Lewin in 1943. There's nothing so practical as a good theory. And that's partly true, but it emphasizes the potential of theory to address real world problems. And his ideas had a lot of influence on various fields, including education, organizational development, and psychology, the three key disciplines influencing our work. Of course, harnessing theory to address real world problems isn't so straightforward. And our own department's former professor, Jerome Bruner, also said in that regard that, and I'm proud to work in the Jerome Bruner building just across the road from here, but he said, thoughtful people have been forever troubled by the enigma of applying theoretical knowledge to practical problems. But in any case, Professor Bruner, I'm going to try to do that because I think it's worthwhile. So could we harness motivation theories, and how could we harness motivation theories to target the specific needs and motivations and challenges of potential candidates, making them a crucial component to our already stretched systems-wide strategies? And these interventions could be grounded in the behavioral sciences and organizational psychology theories that emphasize the importance of engagement and interactivity and address the personal motivation of potential teachers in an engaging and interactive fashion. Let's take a very quick look at three theories that are relevant here. So in terms of a motivation framework for the interventions that we're developing and testing, we'll look at three theories: self-determination theory, self-efficacy theory, and person-environment fit theory. And motivation theories in general explain the reasons for choice and behavior, and they reflect the desire to achieve personal goals and to master skills necessary for success. Ryan and Deasy's self-determination theory has two subcomponents, one of which is the distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, and probably you've heard much about this before. Intrinsic motivation reflects the natural tendency, you see it in very young children, to seek out and conquer challenges, and it stems from interest or curiosity about the world, and the activity itself is rewarding. And that's the natural state of flow that we like to be in when something is very interesting and we get very engaged in it. Extrinsic motivation reflects behavior that occurs in order to gain a reward or to avoid punishment, not really interested in the activity for its own sake. And the second mini theory within self-determination theory is the basic psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And these are the fulfillment of which leads to intrinsic motivation being fostered. And those three basic needs, again, of autonomy, we're going to hear quite a bit about them, competence and relatedness, are central to that second mini theory within self-determination theory. Self-efficacy looks at domain-specific competence, belief in our capabilities to achieve desired tasks, to reach desired goals. And that's in many cases in teacher motivation, one of the strongest predictors of performance and success of teachers and students. And finally, we look at person environment fit theory, which describes the alignment between an individual's interest, values, and competencies with the characteristics and demands of their chosen profession. So in the context of teaching, person vocation fit plays a critical role in influencing teachers' job satisfaction, their performance, and their decision to stay or leave the profession. When teachers feel that their personal strengths and values align with the goals and the culture of their job and of their organization system as a whole, they're more likely to be motivated, engaged, and committed to staying in the field. When we look at the recruitment process, it's the first step towards teacher socialization. And so we use simulations to provide an initial exposure to classroom practice. And you can see in order of increasing engagement and interactivity, 4 of the different kinds of activities that might provide some kind of simulated or even real experience, from realistic job previews that provide feedback, interactive serious games, both of which we'll talk about, virtual and augmented reality, and finally, taster sessions, which we don't engage in, but have shown to be quite effective in certain ways. But let's look at these matrix of recruitment interventions and what is currently provided and how they work to persuade people to consider teaching as a profession. So in this matrix, you can see that we're looking at higher and lower effect size and higher and lower scalability. And many recruitment interventions lack any reach whatsoever, with limited outreach from localized teacher education programs, for example, that don't really reach out to attract people in a very systematic way. Instead, they rely on word of mouth, reputation, and that's fine, but those kinds of passive interventions don't necessarily bear much fruit at a national level. It might work at a local level. But let's look at this matrix and let's look at what's currently working. So one of the key Department for Education approaches is very scalable and probably has a lower effect size, but it does the very useful job of bringing to large numbers of people attention about the possibility of a teaching profession. So this is something that doesn't have a large effect size, but does reach a very wide audience. In contrast, in the upper left-hand quadrant are taster sessions, for example, which is where somebody might spend a week in a school, maybe get paid for it, maybe not, but they get an exposure to what teaching is like. They're pretty effective when people decide to go into this kind of session, but they're not very scalable. Not very many people tend to interact with these kind of activities. We're aiming for the sweet spot in the upper right-hand corner of something that's interactive and scalable. And an example of this might be realistic job previews and gamification of recruitment interventions. Why would we use simulations in education? Well, simulations provide a dynamic, interactive way to recruit teachers by allowing candidates to demonstrate their skills in a really safe environment. These benefits are supported by theoretical frameworks such as experiential learning, social cognitive theory, and situational judgment theory, which all highlight the value of assessing real-world behavior in a protected context, but an authentic context. And so for the remainder of this talk, I want to present some of our most recent work in using simulations to influence recruitment and retention. And in the first study, I'll talk about realistic job previews using simulations. In the second study, I'll talk about a persuasive or a serious game called TeachQuest. And in the final study, I'll talk about recruitment or retention intervention using self-determination theory principles. So from 2015 to 21, we developed a very large, where's Liz? Liz, because she helped me very much develop a very large bank of items for our, we were conducting research on developing situational judgment tests for teachers. And we created a very large item bank with our ERC Consolidator grant and dedicated our research efforts to developing this item bank and to developing selection tools for various contexts around the world. We use these same scenarios, which are authentic, teacher generated, in our realistic job preview interventions. And RJP presents applicants with an honest and detailed view of what a teacher's job entails. And our RJPs involve scenarios that highlight both the rewards and challenges of the role, and they show interactions with students and workload challenges and so forth. They also provide critical feedback to applicants based on their response profile. Essentially, let's just have a quick look at one of our RJP videos.
At the start of the lesson, one of your pupils, Tom, begins to eat a chocolate bar. You are aware that Tom has a tendency to be quite volatile. You tell Tom that it is against school rules to eat during lessons and that he must put the chocolate bar away. Initially, he does as he is asked. However, you later notice that Tom is trying to discreetly eat the chocolate bar throughout the lesson. At the end of the lesson, you ask Tom to stay behind for a break time detention. Tom refuses to stay behind and starts to walk past you out of the classroom.
And usually the situation is, what should you do, bad Tom? And then people rate the appropriateness of various courses of action. And this is a little bit of what it looks like. We did a study, a pilot study essentially, with 120 STEM undergraduates in the UK as our first trial of RJPs. It's a very short intervention, to be honest. They viewed 4 classroom scenarios, they rated responses, they wrote reflections on their response, and then they were provided with real-time feedback. And the outcome variables that we measured were interest in pursuing a career and teaching self-efficacy. And we controlled for their initial interest in teaching. And we found some interesting results. It was reasonably positive. First of all, people got fit messages based on how well their responses aligned with those responses from expert teachers. So excellent fit, very good fit, not so great fit. And for those people who probably didn't take it very serious, some areas of fit where most experiences think differently, most teachers think differently than you about these situations, perhaps, and maybe don't think about teaching. And that's fair enough. Our key findings from this very short 15 to 20-minute interventions, we didn't have any long-term follow-up, we had no control group, was that the difference between pre and post-test was an interest in teaching increased, confidence in teaching didn't really change. So teaching self-efficacy wasn't affected by this interventions. We carried out the same kind of study, but longitudinally, 1 year later in Australia with about 1,500 people interested in the teaching profession. In this case, we use latent change analysis to look at career intentions, perceived fit, and teaching self-efficacy. And this was with those considering a career in New South Wales. We found that career intentions didn't change very much over the 3 RJP sessions, but we did find significant increases in perceived fit and teaching self-efficacy. We're carrying out that same intervention with the DFE in the UK, and we don't have very many outcome measures at this point, and we don't have very many demographic characteristics yet, but we're meeting very soon to get more data and to analyze it. But from our earliest last year's data from a couple of programs at the DFE, we found that over 70% of applicants agreed or strongly agreed that their intrinsic motivation to consider teaching improved after completing the session. But we did realize that the intervention wasn't the most engaging. It felt a bit like work when we had 3 sessions. And so we wanted to create something that was more engaging, still very authentic, but more interactive, and gave the user, the participant, more flexibility and autonomy within that technology. And so we thought, how could we make recruitment more engaging? And we thought, what engages undergraduates? wild parties, music. That wasn't what we were focused on, but gaming is actually pretty important. And about 93% or 92% of students are gamers, and 35% playing most days. And something like 40%, I can't believe this, slightly worryingly, play more than 30 hours per week. And so we thought this is a way to approach undergraduates, and we then paired with computer scientists and game designers and software engineers to develop something, and people from education psychology as well, to develop something interesting. There's quite a large research field on persuasive or serious games. These are just some examples of serious games. So for example, to motivate people with asthma in adherence to their maintenance medication. There was a study looking at engaging Norwegian youth to participate more in politics. And there's quite a large literature in how games can be designed to actually influence attitudes and in fact, behaviors. And so we developed TeachQuest. And this is our project that's funded by the ESRC. And we're building and testing this right now. And I'll present some of the results from our studies. And in this game, you play as a newly qualified teacher at Loxley High, a secondary school we had to pick a location in the UK that didn't produce very much bad reactions. And we went with what, after a little bit of focus group work, is the most neutral city in the UK. What would you guess? Sheffield. So anyways, this game is located in Sheffield, where your challenge is to get through your first term of teaching. And as a new teacher, players can choose how to help their students, who to help, and how they can further their career. They can look at kind of various career pathways and how to handle colleagues, parents, and of course, other teachers. And it was designed alongside real teachers. So a lot of our work was at the beginning, working in focus groups with practicing teachers to get an idea of what the most common challenge. We had an education consultant as well, Rebecca, thank you, who was just out of the classroom essentially, who gave us a lot of horror stories that we could include in the game. And we had worked with it. And for me personally, working across disciplines to lead this project, again, working with people from education, psychology, computer science, and creative arts was really satisfying because it's not something we get to do very often in very many of our projects. So TeachQuest game design and demo, it's 10 to 15 minutes in duration. It's browser-based, replayable through various choices. So you can go back to it if you want and replay it. And it stimulates the emotional experience of teaching, such as dealing with student misbehavior or managing complex classrooms. And it resonates with what real teachers told us when we worked with them to get the scenarios and the information. It offers choice, and there are branching scenarios, and we're at the stage where we're able to track the branching behaviors and decision making, and we're able to look at the motivations. We've assigned motivations to decisions, and so we're getting quite a lot of data about choice and decision making in the game as well. Here's a little preview. Sorry, the music isn't working, but we have beautiful piano music, if you can imagine. It's a visual novel style game, so it's reading and then decision making. But let's just have a look. First day as a qualified science teacher. So a few choices, you make and then you, your very first school experience. And then we have, they're offered choice in the storyline and are able to follow different students as they work through the game. In this one, there are senior colleagues who might be mentors. You're assigned a mentor at the beginning of the game, and they're provided decision-making advice, and they get fit messages at the end of the game, and they get some feedback throughout the game. But here's somebody who's choosing one of those 5 different little circles at the top, and they're going to meet with this teacher, the well-being lead. And I think a student's aunt has died, or grandparent. And you get to know 5 or 6 students reasonably well and help them manage difficult situations. And finally, I'll just give you one more example dealing with a couple of students. This is a scenario you are talking to Grace, and then there's a cheating situation that you have to manage. And again, imagine beautiful piano music. I think it's piano. That's the mentor, Jamie, who gives you advice. That's discouraging. Oh, good. Okay. Right, let's move on from that then. So we did a brief pilot study in 2023, and we had positive results from a small group of those who were engaged with the game. There was an increase, a significant increase in interest in teaching in this quite small group, with an effect size that was medium, and there was an increase in perceptions of fit after playing the game. So that was positive, and we continued in a more serious way, but we also got a little bit more feedback about user play, and most participants felt that it was an authentic depiction of teaching, and that about 2/3 connected with the pupils in the game and felt some kind of affinity to them. And there were some changes of opinion. I think I'd make a good teacher, so that was useful. We did a more serious experimental study in the last 6 months or so, and we're still analyzing some of the data, but with about 1,000 undergraduates. And we had random assignment to the TeachQuest game, to one of the realistic job preview interventions that I talked about, and to another game called Gravity Heist that had nothing to do with teaching whatsoever. And so we compared those 3 groups in terms of a few of the outcome variables that we typically look at: interest, self-efficacy, person, vocation, fit. And we had pre and post test of interest in teaching, self-efficacy, and PV fit. We looked at user experience variables, and we had a delayed post test 6 weeks later. And the findings after the game were that TeachQuest significantly increased interest in teaching, again with a reasonable effect size, as did the realistic job preview, both of which were satisfying. Both of our interventions significantly increased person, vocation, fit, and the RJP, but not the game, significantly increased self-efficacy. And most players rated TeachQuest as realistic, and 2/3 thought it showed them something new about the profession. And you can just see those results graphically here, where on the far right, the control group didn't change at all. And we saw positive changes in the TeachQuest and the RJP group. And then we collected some qualitative data as well. And so these are players, or these are characters from the game, but representing participants. It's realistic, they're up to mischief, but I felt like I could help them. You don't get it right all the time. I like that it's not a perfect view. You can get it wrong. I like seeing it from a teacher's perspective, not an insight I've had before. And finally, there's a lot more variety to the job. To be honest, I thought it was just marking. You know, university lecture at certain points. Okay, for the final bit of this talk, I want to talk about some early career retention project that we're working on right now. And across the world, this is a real problem of keeping people in the profession. Where's my daughter who left teaching? All right, okay. Keeping them in the profession when they encounter very difficult situations. And so the project's called the 5-Year Itch. Funded by John Fell Fund. And it's a 6-month project right now where we're developing a paper prototype of an intervention. It's based on quite a few interviews with early career teachers and about the challenges they face. And it's also based on an umbrella review of teacher retention from a self-determination theory perspective. And an umbrella review is a review of reviews. And so in this case, it's 33 review papers that represent over 1,800 studies on teacher retention and turnover. And we coded the recommendations and solutions that came out of each of the reviews according to this self-determination theory, basic psychological needs associated with that air conditioning. But it's looking at competence, which was the most frequently cited recommendation to improve the skills and competence of teachers, to look at working conditions, relatedness, and autonomy. And the weakest coded intervention was extrinsic reward. So again, this is from a total of 1,800 studies. We looked at 33 reviews, and you can see the competence, relatedness, autonomy being very strong parts of the recommendations that came from these research. So what we're doing is developing, at this case, in this stage, it's a paper prototype of, and Tom and Rebecca are working on this quite hard and presenting this to teachers this week and in the following weeks. But it's a Teach Life dashboard, we're calling it right now. And we look again at autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And we're looking at apps within each of these three areas. So relatedness is connecting with people. And it's a sounding board and social networking tool for early career teachers who might not feel well connected in their schools. We're also developing an explore domain, which reflects autonomy, and we have journeys, which depict a series of teaching career pathways and interesting decisions and choices that people can make, and also your career now, about looking at moving into leadership, for example. And there's information and pathways about how to do that for early career teachers. And then finally, in terms of competence, we have a My Mentor AI-supported teacher mentor, resource swap, which is about sharing resources, obviously, and then research snippets as well, Research in 5, which present on important topics in teaching and can give people a synopsis of current research in a particular area. Here's the My Mentor app. I'll try to give you an example. So you remember Tom eating his chocolate bar. With the realistic job preview, we're now able to show and engage with our AI-supported chatbot. We had a grant to TSP last year, focused on building a large language model for this AI chatbot. And this kind of gives you a sense of how it works. Yeah, I think you need to see this. So I'll try to keep this up. But there's a chocolate bar video, and then there's options that people choose, and then there's engagement with the mentor. And so, there we go. Okay. What should I say to Tom? And so forth. So it just gives advice that we've fed the large language model and that we've been quite protective of in terms of how the chatbot responds. And so that's just an example of how that My Mentor might work on this chat in this program. Okay, almost at the end. The other thing, and Professor Murphy talked about this as our new hub, Oxford Renew, which is a network for research network for the education workforce. And there's examples if you want to look at some of the projects that we're currently working on. And I'll just conclude with this final slide where we might see the UK, like Estonia, as an education powerhouse. And the UK certainly faces very real challenges in sustaining its education workforce. And it's clear that addressing this gap will require a combination of different kinds of interventions, but certainly research and innovation and a deep understanding of what motivates people to enter and remain in the profession. And so by applying the insights that we can gain from theory and from innovative approaches, we can create sustainable solutions that not only attract the best and the brightest, but can retain the next generation of teachers. And through collaboration, innovation, and a commitment to supporting educators, we can ensure that the power of teaching continues to transform lives for generations to come. So thank you very much.
My name is Matthew Weird. I'm the Director of the Department for Continuing Education at the University of Oxford, and I'm here not in that capacity, though it's a nice capacity to be here. I'm here to represent Harris Manchester College and Jane Shaw, the Principal of Harris Manchester College, who's unable to be here as a result of illness today. And just to say thank you, it's the convention here in Oxford that we don't take questions after inaugural lectures, which is one blessed relief. I'm sure that Rob will be, and I should also say I'm a fellow of Rob at Harris Manchester College, which is one of the reasons why I'm here as well today. But there's going to be a reception afterwards where I'm sure Rob will be surrounded by people, right, who will want to ask you lots of questions. I mean, one of the things that I took from that, and I'm not going to talk very long, it's 5 to 6, and everybody probably want to drink and some refreshment, is you talked about intrinsic motivation as a reason for staying in these jobs, and it's not about reward. Well, those of us who work in Oxford will testify, perhaps to the truth of that in other contexts as well. But Rob, that was absolutely fantastic. What you said you were going to do was talk about research and innovation. We got the research that underpins the innovation, and it was clear to me that although we talk about impactful research all the time now, because that's what we are obliged to do and it's what's right to do, but the reasons behind the research and the impact is not simply for professional gain, it's clearly to make a significant social difference. And I think we should all be very grateful to you and many colleagues that you referred to here today who've obviously been involved in that over a long period of time for all of your work. And having been involved in Rob's recruitment, that was a great privilege. I can absolutely tell you what a brilliant decision that was, and I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you very much, Rob.
Please rise for the Pro Vice Chancellor